GM. Welcome to Web3 Academy, a place for entrepreneurs, businesses, and creators to explore and learn how to use Web3 to transform business models and build thriving communities. This is Jaybird, and I'm here with my pal, my buddy, my co-founder, my co-host, Kyle Reedhead, and we're here to keep you on the forefront of technology so you don't fall behind. Boy, oh boy, have we got a great episode for you today. Super stoked. We're going to be talking about how to decentralize everything. And really, what does that even mean? Why do we need to decentralize everything? What are the risks of centralization that we've seen? What are the problems that we are seeing? Some problems that we've seen in the past and some problems that we're seeing right now. And we're also going to talk about Developer DAO and the lessons learned in building what we have heard from many of our previous guests is one of the best DAOs out there, and just recently launched their token code. Shout out to everybody who got in on that. A lot of excitement happened on Twitter the other day on that launch. So lots to unpack and talk about there. But before we get into this, we need your help. Why do we need your help? Because we want to get simple Web3 education out to millions of people, billions of people. In order to do that, we need to grow this podcast, and you can help us do that with one small, simple step. All you need to do is follow or subscribe. If you're listening on Apple or on Spotify, give us a follow. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe. That would be a huge help. We are so grateful for you. Thanks so much. Couldn't do this without you. All right, let's get into it. What is today? It's the Wednesday Doer Spotlight. And we've got Nader from Developer DAO and Celestia here with us. Super stoked. Nader is the developer relations engineer at Celestia and the founder of Developer DAO. Nader, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Did I say your name right?
You did perfectly.
Okay, sweet.
For a change.
I had to double check on that.
I like the just
All
one
right,
name, like share.
I feel like that's the social media way these days. You know, we're just all
Yeah.
going with one name, right? Although I guess on the socials, you don't go so much by Nader, do you, or do you go more by your last name, by Dabit?
No, I go by either, but usually Nader. But there isn't a lot of people with my name, so it makes it fairly easy to kind of stand out, I guess.
Sweet. All right. Well, let's start, as we always do, with we'd love to hear the rabbit hole story of our guests. You know, I think as we build this new technology, it's really important to reflect back on what got us here. And sometimes that's a funny story. Maybe there's a friend involved, somebody pushed you down the rabbit hole. Sometimes it's just a natural story, but we'd love to hear, you know, when did you first go down the rabbit hole? Why did you first go down the rabbit hole, and what really caught your imagination and your interest?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a software developer of about 10 years. So I've been working in the traditional tech world for about 9 years at the time. I had been investing or just dabbling, not like a huge amount of money in crypto since around 2015, and never really looked further than just buying and selling and once in a while maybe using tokens for international like transfers and international purchases over those few years since 2015ish. And from the perspective of a developer, I never really kind of dove into why these protocols existed, or what they were being used for beyond just sending cryptocurrencies, because that's kind of the only thing that I knew existed for a long time. Actually, I didn't understand or know anything about some of the ideas beyond that, with what we now are kind of like labeling as Web3. So in late 2020, early 2021, I heard about this token called the Graph token, and the Graph token just had a website, and I just went and looked at it, and they had this thing called the Graph network, and there's a word that kind of like stood out to me. It's GraphQL, and GraphQL is an API querying language that I would use at AWS, where I was currently working on, and it kind of immediately just drew my attention because I was, connected already with GraphQL, and I was like, okay, why are they using GraphQL? And I just started diving into their documentation, and I started seeing all of the different applications that were like out there that were not just sending cryptocurrencies. So that was my first time to really be exposed to things like DeFi and gaming, and people that were starting to experiment with like social networks and stuff. And from that day, like I spent the next week actually diving into like who were the founders of the graph. And that's when I saw a talk from Yaniv Tal from Graph Day 2020 or something like that, which is like one of the conferences that they put on. And he was talking about Web3, and that was kind of really interesting to me. And then I started doing research on Web3, and I came across this video from Juan Benet from Protocol Labs from like 2018, maybe around Web3. And I just completely became just 100% just enamored like by this whole idea, like because I had been working in software for, like I said, like 9 years at the time, and I'd been working at Amazon Web Services for a little over 3 years, and it just seemed like the challenges and the problems that were trying to be solved in Web3 were so much more meaningful and a lot larger than the work that I was doing at AWS, and just more exciting. So it was almost within just that maybe 1 week period ish that I decided to just quit my job at AWS
Wow.
and work in Web3. And I was actually like a senior level person at AWS, and I was actually on my, like, I was literally in the process of being promoted to principal. Principal is like one of the higher levels at AWS, and you get paid a lot, and it's very good job security and all that. And I essentially left to go work for the Graph and Edge and Node, which was, very, very risky compared to where I was. But it's been a really, really great decision in hindsight, and I'm glad that I did that.
That's incredible. And so the reason that we got you on the show is when the Tornado Cash fiasco first came out via these sanctions from the U.S. Treasury. There was there's all this confusion about like, okay, well, is this a decentralized protocol? Is it not? And why are we blacklisting some addresses and what's going on there? And you put out a great tweet, and you just kind of said like, you got to decentralize everything in the tech stack essentially. And you gave like a list of like all the different things that you need to decentralize. And for me, I didn't even necessarily know that this was all things. So it seems to be very confusing to me. I think a lot of people in this space think, oh, we're building a Web3, we're building decentralized stuff. But in fact, a lot of what we're building in Web3 right now anyway is actually pretty centralized. Would you agree with that in terms of just like most of the apps and things we use? Like not everything along the tech stack is actually decentralized yet. And I think that is why we can still have these issues in what happens we're seeing with like Tornado Cash and that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think when you're building out applications and you want to kind of have experiences that are usable, often in Web3, we're kind of taking these decentralized protocols and we're often kind of putting layers on top of them to make them more accessible, and then therefore introducing points of like failure or points of centralization. And I think that it's a pretty nuanced and complicated like topic for us to dive into. And I think hopefully we can kind of make this, we can distill this and make it understandable maybe for people that aren't so technical, and I can give my opinions around how some of this stuff can does work, and how we can kind of make this happen. But in general, I would say, yeah, a lot of the stuff that we use that we maybe call Web3, what does that even mean? And like a lot of times, like when you look at the original description of what Web3 like actually is, it's kind of described as maybe applications built on top of decentralized protocols. But again, a lot of these protocols are not 100% decentralized, so therefore they have these points of I don't know if you would call them weak points, or points of that they can that can be attacked, or risk, points of risk. And each protocol is different, and some of them are really resilient, some of them are not. And I think we have that whole spectrum. And as we build out applications that we want to make accessible and usable, a lot of times you have to introduce centralized parts to them just to make the experience, usable for people around the world, especially, if we want to onboard a lot of new people. But I think we need to focus on kind of making sure that the underlying infrastructure below that does remain decentralized, even if we build out these more centralized layers on top. So a good example of that might be something like Lens protocol, which is, a set of smart contracts deployed on a network, which is Polygon, but they've built out like this centralized API layer on top of it that makes it really easy for developers to use. But the underlying data is still being stored on the blockchain. So if their API got attacked or it went down or something happened, maybe it got censored because someone's storing some information, and it's being exposed on their API that is like illegal or something, who knows what could happen. Even if they decided to shut down the API, the data like underlying the applications that are running on top of the API is still there. And then people can kind of still surface that data and all of that. So that's like, an example of maybe a protocol that has both centralization and decentralization, but it's probably the direction that we're headed in the future.
It sounds like you got to start with the foundation, right? And I would take Ethereum as kind of the main foundation for this space, or one of them. And the layer one blockchain, let's say, not just Ethereum, is sort of the main foundation to be built off of. And then sort of like as you go up the tech stack, we work to start decentralizing all those levels. I think before we jump into it, let's just set a little bit of foundational knowledge here of like decentralization gets thrown around all the time. And I wonder, like, do people even really understand what that means or why it's even important? I just want to, like, when we think of technology, I think people need to understand that centralization of technology is a big problem. And we've seen it be a big problem for a long time now, because one, technology is like this exponential growth of amount of people that can be on a specific technology. So like when you think of like a country, like let's say the US, most powerful country in the world, there's 300 million. But then you think of Facebook, it's only been around for what, 10, 15 years now. It's got like almost 3 billion people on it, right? In 15 years, like it's so fast, it's so exponential, that growth. And there's one company that owns that. And Facebook is way more centralized than something like the US. And there's businesses being built on top of it. There are people that rely on it to speak to others. And the fact that there's one centralized point of risk, or whatever the word was that you wanted to call it, like that's a big problem. And on a social platform, like maybe people don't care so much, but like censoring, what you say, and censoring, the content you're posting, like that sucks. You don't want that. But it goes way bigger than that, right? Like when there's a business being built on it, like Twitter, when they all of a sudden just removed their API many years ago, like they just kind of rugged every business that was on there. And then you think of what's happening here with Tornado Cash, right? Like the government just wants to decide that, hey, we don't like what they're doing. There's a few bad actors on there. We want to shut it down. And they just want to shut it right off. And thankfully, Tornado Cash, the protocol, was not completely centralized, because they couldn't do that. But if it was a Web2 application, they could. They just shut it down. The business is done, and away it goes. But thankfully, there was Tornado Cash as a protocol, and so they couldn't shut it fully down, but they could shut parts of it down. I just wonder, is there any more you want to add on just like the importance of decentralizing, and then maybe just kind of share like, what does that actually mean to decentralize something? That's what I'm trying to understand, is like, what it like, can you just talk us through what that means to someone?
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot to what you just talked about. So I'll kind of talk about it in a couple of different ways. So when we think about building software, when we think about centralization and the tech stack, you often will kind of think about where the data is stored. Maybe when we build out almost every application that we use today, Twitter or Facebook or whatever, or if someone builds out their own version, maybe of a social network, and they kind of just do it the traditional way, they might go to AWS and they create a database. And then every time someone like does anything, that information is stored on that database. And for the most part, unless you are a massive company like Facebook that does what is called kind of like redundancy or backup or replication, where you kind of like replicate all this data across a couple of databases, most of the time it's just stored in a single database. So, and not only that, but that database is controlled by a person or someone with access. So a single person can go in there and make updates to that information, and they can change, they can remove, they can read. It's not really something that is secure, in my opinion, like when it comes to what we think of when we think about decentralized infrastructure. So not only is this information stored in a single place, but and therefore you have the vulnerabilities around the updates and stuff not being fully controlled by you, but also there's a single point of failure. So if that database goes down, your application just won't work anymore. When we think about larger companies like Facebook and stuff, they're still centralized. They might have like a backup of that information, but it's also the control is centralized. So I've talked to so many people that have had things like really successful YouTube channels, and one day someone like finds out their username and password, or they get hacked, or maybe they live in a country where they said something wrong, and their entire channel just literally gets deleted, even though they've spent years building up that audience, and it might even be kind of like a source of them like being able to pay their bills or whatever. You don't have any control over that. So like the control is kind of out of your hands, and also that data isn't persisted anywhere if you haven't kind of decided to download each like video. But even if you did, like your actual presence is not downloaded anywhere. It's gone. So all those followers, all that stuff is gone. So there's a lot of points to kind of like talk about, and how these things between the infrastructure overlap with the user experience, and how people experience building their presence on these different platforms. So there is definitely overlap between that. But when we think about decentralized infrastructure, on the other hand, like Ethereum is a great example of this. If I create a profile, let's say somewhere on some social network, and that information is logged on chain, either on Ethereum or maybe some other like layer 2, then that information is pretty much always going to be there. As long as the network exists, it's always going to be there. If I build up a presence on a social graph or a social network like Lens Protocol, then if I have 1,000 followers, then no one can ever really take that from me. If the only thing that could possibly happen maybe is if I get hacked on my wallet or something. Maybe that's definitely something that can still happen. It's something to take into consideration. It's kind of like a trade-off. But like as long as I don't decide to kind of give that private key and that seed phrase away, as long as I kind of am the only one controlling that, then that profile exists. And not only that, but I can actually port that entire group of followers to multiple platforms. So when we build up a presence on Twitter, we don't have that same presence on YouTube. We don't have it on TikTok. We don't have it on Facebook. But with these Web3 protocols, because all of the data is public and open, you can actually just kind of build, you could think of, imagine building like 1,000 followers on Twitter, and then someone builds like a YouTube version on top of that same protocol, then you now have all those followers. So this is already like starting to happen. You have Lens 2 that's built on Lens Protocol. You have Lenser that's built on Lens Protocol. I think there's like a dozen or so now social networks that are kind of built on that protocol. And the cool thing is, like, you just go to this new front end and you now have all these followers. So if you create a video, you now automatically have a bunch of built-in, you have a built-in network that you've kind of like ported over. So yeah, when we think of like decentralization, a lot of times we think about decentralization of the infrastructure. But we also think about things like decentralization of the ownership, decentralization of control. The whole theme of decentralization is definitely very strong in pretty much everything we do, I guess, in Web3.
I think one of the key differentiators when you think about decentralization is in the centralized world, the risk is that there's a third party that's controlling all of your stuff. And so the risk is on them. They can do whatever they want with it. When we're talking decentralized stuff, you said there is some risk, like someone could hack our wallet, or really we could give away our seed phrase or something. But at least the risk is no longer that it's on someone else. The risk is actually just on us, not to screw it up and lose our seed phrase, or like put our seed phrase in the wrong space. So it makes us responsible for the things that we own, whether that's money, whether that's data, whatever that is. So I think that's one of the
and it doesn't go further than that, right? It stops with you, exactly. Right? It stops at you versus what you said. I mean, I think we all know digital privacy and digital security is a massive concern by the world now. right? I mean, I think something like 9 in 10 Americans have fears of digital privacy and security. But what they don't realize is, as you said, most of that is controlled by possibly one person in
Right.
one data storage house, right? And so there, if one breach gets made, that point of weakness, and I really like that line, that point of weakness can I mean, explode to affect millions of people, as opposed to with blockchain, there's a limit. It can only affect one. It doesn't go further than that.
Unless they hack a DAO or something that is something that everyone owns. So, okay, let's talk a little bit about what it means to then go and decentralize things. So like right now we talk about people who are using, let's say, Tornado Cash, or Uniswap had some issues before. And the protocol itself continues to work, yet the front end, for example, in the Tornado Cash example, all of a sudden you couldn't use the front end of Tornado Cash. But if you're a developer and you knew how, you could still go and use Tornado Cash. Like I think you can still use it today. And there are some people that are blocked from using like Uniswap front end, but they can just go and build their own front end if they want. So currently we're seeing there are decentralized protocols that you can use, but there are other parts of this tech stack that are not decentralized. And so we still have that risk. And like we've seen, governments can sanction or shut it down and kind of block it. And so the idea is, well, we need to start decentralizing every part of the tech stack. Can you sort of walk us through what that means and what that looks like? Like I imagine cloud is something that needs to become decentralized. And you said you were a big part of AWS. But I know a lot of what we do is hosting things on AWS or on Google or iCloud or whatever. And those are centralized clouds. So I imagine there's many components to the internet that we need to decentralize for us to really get to the point in the promise of like what Web3 really is. Can you sort of give your thoughts on that?
Yeah, first of all, I think it kind of just depends on the type of thing that you're building, the type of application that you're building. I think that you're going to continue to see people building out applications on the traditional tech stack forever, because it just is actually a lot easier to kind of just spin up a database and like, build in that way. And I think that while Web3 brings a lot of great, use cases and benefits for certain types of applications, I kind of view it as more as like an additional way that we can do things that might disrupt certain industries, and it opens the door to additional use cases, but doesn't completely like overtake everything that we had before. Kind of how we see like machine learning and AI bring a lot of great use cases to the table, and they have disrupted a few industries, but they haven't kind of like replaced, I don't know, like everything that has come before it. The mobile platform came around and we were able to build mobile apps that had better experiences, but it's not like no one has a website anymore. In fact, we still see tons of mobile websites.
We
so
still
that's kind
use
of the way
email.
I look at Web3. Yeah. I mean, so with Web3, we now have new ways to build things, and we have new types of financial applications that we can build. We have new types of like social graphs and social media applications that we can build. A lot of them have trade-offs. A lot of them, in my opinion, are much better. And but there's still certain use cases that that you probably wouldn't want to build in Web3. And I forgot, what was the second part of the question?
Well, I was just trying to understand. There's all these different layers to a tech stack, and really, I guess what I'm trying to understand is like, which ones do we need to decentralize, right? Like I know right now we've decentralized the like sort of consensus layer. That would be the Ethereum or the different layer ones in that. But and so the protocols that are built on top of it can be decentralized, yet the front ends are not. And so I'm wondering, like, is that a thing we need to start decentralizing? Is cloud something we need to decentralize? Like, I'm just curious at how far along the tech stack we need to go. In terms
That's
of
a good question. It's a cool discussion too, because when we think about the tech stack, you have these primitives that you can kind of use as a developer to build out applications. So that would be typically a database. It would be something like a server to have business logic. You would have something like file storage to store videos and images and stuff, and then maybe a way to kind of host your application and have it accessible via like HTTP. And using like these set of primitives, you can kind of say, I want to build a social media app, or I want to build, I don't know, like this application. And you can typically combine those primitives and get like 95% of the way there. So in Web 2, we have very, very solid understanding of what that looks like. But in Web 3, we're still kind of figuring that out. But I think we're getting there, and I think we have we don't really have the concept of a database. Instead, we have kind of this concept of a blockchain, and we're seeing like peer-to-peer databases that are trying to maybe have like maybe another maybe type of primitive that looks similar to a database, but is also a little different than a blockchain. So I think the three types of like data storage mechanisms that you have kind of out there right now will be a traditional database, a peer-to-peer network, peer-to-peer database, or a blockchain. So in the Web3 stack, you would probably think of a place to store, data in the sense of like a social media application would be a very low cost network like Polygon or something. That would be the closest thing that you would have, but at scale, that's still probably like fairly expensive if you want to store every single interaction. But yeah, so the tech stack in Web3 to have it fully decentralized would be something like a blockchain. And then on the front end, like most people are still deploying their front ends to places like AWS and or I don't know, Netlify or Vercel, which is fine for a lot of use cases. But if you're building out like a financial application that is being used globally, any country that in the whole world can maybe decide, hey, like we put on this new law and like this new restriction, and we no longer want to like allow someone to kind of use that, and they could probably find a way to block it or whatever. Or that's the thing though with these decentralized protocols, you're kind of like taking away the middle person who might be the developer, like maintaining these things, and you're deploying them to these protocols that like theoretically will last for are really the applications we living on protocols that the application will theoretically last forever as long as the protocol exists forever. And if you can kind of understand how to build out applications in that way, then you have what would be kind of considered an unstoppable application, or an indestructible like front end if you were to deploy in that way. So a good example of this is like I think Arweave would be a really interesting piece of this tech stack, because they originally kind of like launched as a file storage layer that allowed you to store a video or an image or a text file forever for a single transaction fee, which is kind of like a blockchain. But for blockchains, you never store like large pieces of data. It's typically like very small pieces of data, like a financial transaction or maybe a string of text. But beyond that, you're not going to store like a video on the blockchain. So like where is that video, that file storage layer? Well, IPFS exists, but with IPFS, you don't really have this guarantee of your data being available forever. So if you store something on IPFS, you have to do what's called pinning, meaning you have to kind of like pay this recurring fee to, or you have to do this recurring thing. And it's essentially paying like this fee to keep it alive on the network. But with Arweave, you just pay like a single transaction fee and it's always available. But they've continued kind of building out tooling and improving the protocol. They have this idea of what's now the permaweb, which means you can kind of like launch an application and have it made accessible via HTTP on the actual protocol forever. So if you wanted to launch a front end that you wanted to make sure like never went down, then you could launch it on Arweave. And if you combined a front end on Arweave with a protocol, then you kind of have now this indestructible application that literally cannot be taken down.
So that's already possible. Like we can already do that. We can put why does Tornado Cash not do that, or why does Uniswap not do that? Like I don't understand, why are people? Well, not
Uniswap is like they put the black. They kind of like put the blacklisted addresses or whatever. They denied them to be accessed because I think they have to conform with regulations and stuff. So their companies might be based in parts of the world, like in the United States or whatever, where they have to kind of abide by these regulations. But like what isn't stopping some anonymous person from forking like the old Uniswap front end and just kind of like deploying that on Arweave? And I'm sure that's already happened. And I know that I've seen people deploying front ends on top of Tornado Cash that are on some of these protocols that enable that. But like Uniswap couldn't probably officially do that because if they did, they would be kind of like going against the regulations, and then they would therefore be vulnerable to some type of litigation.
And I guess even if they did make it on our Weave or something and decentralize the front end. And by the way, to those who don't know what a front end is, that's just like the actual site that you would use when you type in like Uniswap I don't know what it is, .org or something like that. Like it's the page that you actually interact with. That's the front end. And then behind that is like the thing that's actually making the swap or the transaction happen. That's the protocol layer. You can have many front ends which interact with that back end in that decentralized protocol. But Uniswap, I guess, even if they did decentralize the front end, they still own that, and they are a US based company. So they have to follow the law regardless, right? So it doesn't really matter. But some anonymous person could go spin up a front end and make that decentralized, and that's fine. The other interesting thing that came up from this Tornado Cash was that and I don't exactly know how this works, but with GitHub, the source code or the code from Tornado Cash that was then blacklisted and blocked. Can you kind of explain how GitHub works? And I know there was a decentralized version already. So can you just sort of talk about that? Because that one I didn't really understand.
Yeah, that was kind of strange, because not only did they remove the repository, they actually deleted the user's account for the person that had created the repo, which to me was kind of weird for sure. Well, and to kind of take a step back, GitHub is just a website where people go and they launch their source code for the applications that they build for people that might not be have heard of it before. So if I want to build an app and I want to have my source code made available for people to check out, I can throw it on GitHub, or I can use GitHub to collaborate with other people privately around building an application. So it's kind of this place where developers, put their code. Now, GitHub was bought by Microsoft a few years ago, and Microsoft works with the CIA. They work with the FBI. They literally have ICE contracts. It's completely public and open. So it's not really that surprising that Microsoft would be very, very compliant with whatever and take excessive action. But that's the whole thing. Like where what we're getting at is like Tornado Cash is viewed by a lot of people as not a place for people to do illegal activity. Instead, it's looked at as almost like the internet. So anyone can use the internet to do illegal stuff. People send child pornography. They blackmail people. They threaten people. They literally have coordinated assassinations via the internet. Do we kind of hold the person that created the internet accountable for that? Or do we instead say, the internet is essentially this permissionless protocol that anyone can use for good or bad? And that's kind of the way that Tornado Cash is viewed by most people, I think. You can use Tornado Cash to maybe donate to someone that is running for office that you don't want everyone in the world to know that you're kind of like political or whatever, maybe because you're in maybe you're in a public facing thing, and you just don't want that to be out there. Or maybe you want to send donations to someone like into Ukraine or something. I don't know. There's all types of reasons. I mean, there's a reason that everyone doesn't have their bank account publicly available for everyone to view, because
absolutely.
I mean, like that's kind of how Tornado Cash is people use it to hide things that they're doing, just that they don't want open. But the assumption made, or kind of like the argument made by, I guess, people that wanted to shut it down, is that, oh, this is only used for illegal activities, and that just isn't true. So what happens around the world when you kind of have each of these individual governments making these laws? And I think that's kind of where we're getting at with decentralization, is that, like, what if we can build out protocols and companies and applications that are kind of above all of these individual restrictions, and people can choose to build out maybe front ends that take the experiences that they want to show to people, and kind of like maybe filter out the things that they don't want. But coordinating financial regulation around the world is very, very, very complicated and very hard. And coordinating any types of rules globally is actually like really, really tough. But these protocols kind of allow you to do that. And I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where everyone in the whole world is like on the same page or agrees with everyone else. So I think Web3 allows developers and people to build out companies, applications, teams, and stuff that are kind of, not really bound to these types of, in my opinion, that in particular was kind of like a dumb thing to do. And to actually take that developer's account offline as well, he's, contributed to so much other open source and built so many other things. Now he lost all of his code. Instead, we now are starting to see other protocols like pop up, like Radical. Radical is essentially a hosted version of Git, just like GitHub is, except it's on a peer-to-peer network. And you can also use on-chain. You can also kind of like anchor stuff on-chain. So therefore, your code will theoretically, always be available. And there's no centralized point of control for someone to go shut it down. So if you put your code on Radical, the idea is that it's almost, like a blockchain in the sense that no one is in control of it. You have as the user that controls that key, you have the ability to kind of like update that code, but it can't really be taken down or censored.
See, this is why I feel like at some point we're going to have to just decentralize all tools and all everything, because they're just going to keep poking at the things that are centralized. You know what I mean? Like, it's like they don't want us to build open source protocols. So all of a sudden they go after GitHub, right? And they don't let you create code. I didn't even think that was a thing they would do. Then it's like, oh, they don't want you to host, whatever it is, something to do with DeFi or finance, whatever. So they go after the cloud that it's all hosted on, right? They go after Amazon or something. And it's like, every time there's something centralized in tech, it's just another point that the government or whoever can sort of be like, all right, just shut that down. And they're just going to keep pushing until I feel like we just decentralize literally everything. Do you think we ever get to that point, or how do you think we get through this? Because it seems like we have to keep doing it if we're going to keep fighting back, essentially. Because if we didn't have what would you call it? Radical was the other one against GitHub. Then like maybe we don't have a place to.
No, Radical just has. Yeah, Radical has just been, they've actually been building this for a long time. It's been out for over a year for sure. I'm not sure exactly, but it's just kind of like a way for you to do GitHub, but in a Web3 decentralized way, and a more, way that could be considered more censorship resistant and not vulnerable to kind of like someone just coming in and removing it. But like, yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't say we're necessarily moving for everything to be decentralized, but I think we are moving to a place where everything can be decentralized. So like if you are worried that you're building out like a financial application that could be, taken down by a certain like country around the world where one of your users might be, you might say, okay, I'm going to build this on the blockchain or something. If you're building out like a really basic dating app or something for people in your city to use, you probably might not use the blockchain. So yeah, I think it just kind of depends on what you're building. But I think like having the option to build in this way is very important. So we need Radical, we need blockchains, we need things like Arweave. So if someone does want to build something like that, then they have the tools and the protocols available to them. And I do think that, again, like a lot of things are better using Web3 technologies and blockchain. So financial applications that are, made available to people around the world, it just makes so much more sense to build them using these blockchain protocols, because you kind of think about how every single country in the whole world has different regulations around around finance. So every bank in every country is different. Every country has different ways for people to get their identification, and all the layers that are built on top of that just for someone to send money between countries is so unbelievably like, I can't, like, as a software developer, I can't even start to begin to explain at how much like waste and complexity is there. And also it just kind of is a gatekeeping mechanism for literally, over 1 billion people that don't have bank accounts because they don't have all these exact things in order. With crypto, or with blockchains, you can literally just have a web browser and receive a payment within about 1 minute by installing an extension, sending someone your address, and getting that money. That is revolutionary. And I think like any financial application that's built in the future, it just makes a lot more sense as crypto adoption increases to have that as an option. And I think I'm not saying that everyone should use crypto and have blockchains as their payment mechanism, but if you want to enable, international interactions and you want to kind of give everyone the opportunity to kind of like interact on your application, and it's a financial application, it does make sense to kind of move in that direction. Yeah,
Right.
and have it as an option. Yeah.
I think it's a good point that not everything has to be decentralized, but we should have the ability to decentralize in case you needed it to. And maybe a dating app doesn't need it, but probably anything financial should. I like to think of Web3 as sort of like a parallel financial system or a parallel internet to what currently exists. Like you said, our financial systems and our internet really is very fragmented from country to country, right? Especially the financial world. Like, to try to send money from one country to another is just the most insane thing I've ever seen. And the fact that that exists in 2022 is wild. But it's all sort of, it's basically a parallel one where, like, if you want to just link into the global financial system, you can do it over here on these crypto rails, or you can stick to your sort of country one, which is segmented from country to country and is a hassle and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I like that point of, like, it just should be an option for anyone who is building. I want to dive into Developer DAO in just a second, but I just have one question. And this has nothing to do with decentralization really, but because you're a developer and you're big in the space and have done a lot, I'm curious. Everyone complains about the UI and the UX of Web3. And I know it's early, so it's going to take time for this to improve. And this is what I have to keep telling people that ask me or that I try to introduce to this space. Like, what's going on here? How long is it going to take until these apps and this space is actually like very user friendly and just makes sense to everyone? Because to me, it seems like we're still years away. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we've gotten a lot better than we were maybe a year and a half ago when I first started looking at all this stuff. So we've definitely made improvements, but we have a lot longer of a way to go. And I mean, there's so many people that I know that are in this developer community in Web3 that are focused on this, that are building out really great things, that I think it's just a matter of time. And if we look at the early web versus where it is today, it's just not even comparable. And we've just now started really seeing this wave of adoption of people integrating crypto and Web3 into web and mobile applications in the past couple of years. Like, it's existed, crypto has existed, but there hasn't really been a huge developer wave of adoption where people are building real applications on top of it really up until the last couple of years. So I think it really is still early on. And I think that what you're going to end up seeing is kind of this idea of progressive decentralization, kind of how I mentioned how Lens has both a protocol that is on a blockchain and also a centralized indexer and querying layer for developers and to use. Them kind of going out of their way to build out that additional layer for developer experience. I think we're going to see similar things happen for user experience. And I think a great example of that is Coinbase. Like, you may or may not be a huge fan of Coinbase, but they've done more for crypto adoption maybe than any other company
100%.
that exists. And they didn't make that happen by building out the best version of Uniswap or the best decentralized exchange. They built that by building like a centralized exchange and enabling people to kind of take their money and buy crypto, and then they can all take that crypto and then go and use something like Uniswap. So unfortunately, and this is probably an unpopular opinion among the decentralization maxis, I do think that for user experience to improve, a lot of times you have to have like these points of centralization temporarily until you kind of like get there. And it just depends on what that looks like. Like, a social media app is going to look much different than a financial application, which is going to look much different than a game. And Reddit, for example, is a really great example of this. They just adopted Arbitrum Nova, which itself is kind of like a trade-off as a blockchain for centralization. Nova uses what's known as a data availability committee, and this is kind of getting really technical, but it's kind of like a centralized place to store the data versus the data availability being done on a blockchain. But the trade-off there is that the transaction cost is extremely inexpensive and the transaction speed is very fast. So it allows them to kind of take a blockchain, integrate it into their normal web application at scale and give users a good user experience, and it makes it affordable for them. And that's a perfect example. Like, what Reddit did is kind of what I think we're going to see more and more companies doing.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think people need to be patient. We still are like the foundational layer of blockchains is still being researched and figured out and being built on, right? Like we're about to do the big merge. And so it's like, we haven't even figured out decentralization yet. You know, we're getting there. But like you said, it's going to be a progressive thing, and it's going to take some time to kind of figure all that out. So in order to do any of this, we need developers, right? We need a lot more developers in Web3 if we're going to succeed in Web3 kind of taking over the world. And so you started Developer DAO, and I think I'm interested to hear exactly what Developer DAO is and what you're doing, but really it's trying to onboard more developers into the space. But you built it in a cool way. You built it as a DAO, so not a centralized company. And so we want to kind of just pick apart this process, because we've heard from a lot of different people, like, this has been a really successful DAO. People have had amazing experiences in there. We actually just had some members from our community that just got into Developer DAO, and they were super excited. So walk us through, like, what is Developer DAO, and kind of why did you start it this way?
Yeah, so Developer DAO is meant to be a community of people that kind of come together and network, but also create educational content and help developers find jobs, and just onboard people into developer jobs really in Web3 for the most part, even though we have a lot of people from the traditional tech world that are all also kind of like coming in and experimenting there. But yeah, the main focus is to be kind of like a public good. And a lot of the DAOs that were around when I created Developer DAO were financial facing, or NFTs that were kind of focused on like maybe investing in NFTs and like some weird DeFi stuff. I wasn't too excited about any of that stuff, to be honest. What I was interested in, though, was like some of the more social communities. So I thought Friends with Benefits was a cool experiment. Just in general, it was an idea, and seeing them like have some fair amount of success early on was really kind of interesting, because it wasn't really focused on anything in particular. Like they weren't trying to, build out anything. They were just kind of getting together and trying to figure it out. But the bond that was there, like within the community members, was really strong. And I thought it would be really cool to kind of like take that ethos and apply it to just developer community. And that's the only thing we're going to focus on, is like building stuff and teaching each other and trying to help each other find jobs and network. And yeah, so I thought it would be a cool idea, but I didn't think that I was going to be the one to build it. But a few months after I had the idea, no one had done it yet, and I saw an opportunity to kind of create an NFT that would be only interesting to like developers and maybe no one else, to hopefully not get a lot of speculators like buying it or interested in it. Yeah, I just wanted to only onboard kind of engineers.
Real people,
so I launched this. Yeah, I launched the idea on a live stream. I deployed the smart contract live, and we started just getting a steady stream of people over the course of like 3 months. And then, at this point, it's been about 11 months, and we've landed literally countless people really great jobs. A lot of times people are going from making, minimum wage types of deals to like $100,000 or more. People landing jobs at, really great companies like Polygon and The Graph. And our main focus is still the same, around onboarding people into Web3, education, everything free. So if we put on an event, it's completely free and it's completely open to everyone. Like, you literally don't have to be a member of Developer DAO to benefit from the work that we're doing. Hopefully that's kind of like the goal, is that we don't want to kind of make it to where, oh, you have to be in this community to benefit from it. Like, everything we're doing should benefit everyone in the world as a public good. But the way we coordinate is within the DAO, and then therefore there needs to be some type of mechanism for entry and stuff. But we create free educational content, free conferences, and it's just been a really, really cool experience. And we just launched our own governance token, which is going to enable us to be able to pay contributors with more governance, and also enable a lot more people to come into the community and stuff like that. So.
Interesting. And let's dive into a little bit of this. The token, I think, is called Code. Is that right? CODE.
Yes.
And so it's a governance token. So is it go out to the community and now they can vote on how things are going to work? Or what's like, walk us through some of the utility of this token. It's always interesting to understand this when it comes to a DAO.
Yeah, we thought about this and talked about it, and we still are going to now continue to iterate on like how it's used. But like, to me, governance should be done through a combination of maybe ownership into the community, so tokens, along with reputation, along with maybe contribution, along with all these other metrics. And it's pretty complicated to kind of figure all that stuff out programmatically and in a fair way. But I think that's kind of like where we're headed with this token. Right now, we're strictly using it for governance, and we've done the distribution in a way that kind of has rewarded, hopefully, the people that have helped get the community to where it is today. So if you helped early on and created the Discord, or maybe you created a website for us, or you did something, then like we tried to kind of give the community a way to say, hey, I did this work, and therefore I want to be, given a portion of the governance. So we did spend a long time trying to figure out the most fair way. And obviously you're never going to make everyone happy, but we spent a very long time and a lot of going back and forth trying to figure out how to do this in the most fair way. But essentially, if you helped build the community, then you were given some type of compensation in the form of the token. And now in the future, if you continue to help, you'll get more compensation in that way. And then we also want to find a way. So we have like already a scholarship program that just gifts the memberships for free to anyone who signs up, but we can't really do that at scale because we have thousands of people on that list at this point. What we want to do instead is like give people a way to earn membership by completing tasks that will help their own career. So it's kind of like a win-win situation. If you want to become a developer, you could like take this 10-part tutorial course, finish it, and not only do you kind of like gain education, but you also gain interest into the community. You can either sell those on the market if you want to, or you can use them to join whatever. We don't really care. It's not about like it's a nonprofit. Like we literally have been scraping by as far as like money is concerned. Gitcoin early on really supported us and kind of gave us we did like a token swap. So they gave us kind of like almost a feeling of, oh, we are a legit thing, and a lot of confidence. And also we're very aligned with Gitcoin because Gitcoin is all about public goods, and we're all about public goods. So yeah, we're not kind of like, again, a financial like DAO. I remember like when we first started, there was like these DAOs that were doing like Bored Ape Yacht Clubs and all these other NFTs, and they were had like $20 million in the treasury, and we're sitting here with like a few thousand in the treasury, just trying to scrape by. But I think it's built a stronger community maybe than you would see in some of these, because like we don't care what the market is. Like we literally don't care if it's up or down, because everyone in our community is focused on landing a job that pays them regardless. So what they do with that money, it doesn't matter. But if they can get a $200,000 a year job through the community, then the market, it might matter if it just completely went to shit and like they got fired or something, but as long as the company exists and they're getting paid, that's kind of like more of our focus. So
I love that. I think community first, and everything you do in this space, it's always community first. And I actually love the idea of doing everything you can to like not to make your NFT or to make whatever it is that you're doing, like not not go out to speculators.
Attractive to speculators.
Yeah, attract. That's the word I was looking for. Attract speculators. I love that idea. It's actually super smart. I like to usually dive into sort of the business model of the DAO. Like, how do you plan to keep that token from not going to zero? Like we see a lot of DAOs, but I don't think we really have time to do that right now because we're actually just finishing up here. I'm going to do a speed round of questions. I think Jay's internet is not so great, so he's not going to be able to do it today. I'm just curious, is there anything else you want to mention on Developer DAO or anything you guys have plans to do before I get into that? Give us kind of an update of what's going on next now that the launch is done. And then also give us just your call to actions. Like if someone wants to join the Developer DAO, how do they do that? Where do we learn from you guys? Where do we find you? Give me that spiel.
Yeah, so we're developer_DAO on Twitter. We have a link in our Twitter bio for our website. I would check out our website. It's Developer DAO, I believe. I should know this, right?
You should, but that's okay. Well, either way.
Developer DAO. Oh, it's developerdao.com. Okay. Perfect. So developer.com. You can join our Discord there. You can go to our Notion doc, which has a wiki that explains exactly how to join and stuff like that. So anyone can join. And you can kind of get more information there. And we really focused again on a very, very decentralized token distribution. We got a lot of interest from venture capitalists to buy like 3 to 5% of our community. We literally said no to everyone. So we have no VC like investment at all. So everyone that owns tokens right now have been early contributors essentially. So like we don't really have, in my opinion, that much like worry about the token price, at least not right now. But again, it's less about the price and more about, the other things that come out of being part of the community. So.
Right. Absolutely. So we'll put the links in the show notes as well, so you can just click to them in case you didn't get the links there. Okay, I'm going to do a couple speed round questions. Is that okay with you?
Sure. Okay,
perfect. So we're going to start with, what is an NFT you'll never sell? And the Developer DAO one does not count.
I was going to say the Developer DAO one, but
I gotta make it more difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna go ahead and look at my NFTs right now because I don't have a ton right now.
Are you a big NFT collector?
Not really. I mean, I kind of play around with them because they're kind of fun a little bit.
Right.
Maybe my profile pic on Twitter, because I just minted it, and it's just, the first time I did mint my own, NFT to use in my profile. So yeah, I would say my profile picture.
Wait, isn't that a picture of you?
Yes, it is. Because like
that's amazing.
I use it as my picture on social media and stuff, and I like it.
Nice, I love that. Cool. Okay, so speaking of Twitter, who is your favorite person to follow on Twitter?
Oh, that's a very hard one for sure. I guess one of the people I might have my notifications on for, and let me see who all those people are. This is really tough. I would say maybe Gitcoin, because I'm just a huge fan of Gitcoin.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. They got a good Twitter?
I just like the community and stuff. I wouldn't say they have the most entertaining Twitter,
right.
But because I'm a fan of Kevin and Scott and everything that they do, it's just, yeah.
Love that. Cool. Which Web3 project are you most excited about other than Developer DAO?
Definitely Celestia. I mean, we didn't really get a chance to talk about Celestia, but I had the opportunity to pretty much do anything when I left the graph, to either start my own thing or work for pretty much any protocol. But after kind of really understanding the space over the course of the last year and a half or so, and understanding the future of blockchains and where we're headed around architectures from the perspective of a developer, Celestia and their approach and their team are just, to me, the most exciting thing happening right now.
Yeah, I have to second that. I mean, I'm not a super techie, but I do try to dive into this stuff as much as I can and try to understand like layer ones and layer twos and all this. And so anyone who's listening, everyone I talk to in this space that like really gets this stuff is like, they're really big on Celestia. So I highly recommend you look into them. Okay, last question. If you had a billboard, okay, that 1 billion people were going to see, what would you put on it?
That's a really tough question. Okay, so I really enjoy reading about Stoicism and also Buddhism, and I think that those principles have helped me a lot with my mental health and also with my career and stuff. And I think there's this book that I read that's written by Ryan Holiday called The Obstacle is the Way, and like everything in the book is just kind of talking about, facing your challenges head on and not kind of like beating around the bush. So maybe just the title of that book, The Obstacle is the Way.
I like that. I like that a lot, actually. Awesome, Nader. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was a great conversation to sort of dive into Tornado Cash and just, what this all means for this industry. And great to learn about Developer DAO, and congrats on everything you're doing there, and keep up the great work. Excited to kind of track that and see how that goes. But thanks so much for taking the time to speak with myself and somewhat Jay, although I think his internet's not doing so well. But listen, all the best, and thanks for everything you're doing in the Web3 space.
Thank you, Kyle. I appreciate it, and it was great to be here.
Thank you for listening to Web3 Academy. We hope this helps you along your Web3 journey. And if it does, please share this episode and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. By the way, if you have yet to join the Discord community, you are missing out. This is where all the magic happens. This is where we learn,
where we ask questions, where we network. You want to be in there. The link to join is in the description below. And finally, a quick disclaimer. Nothing in this podcast was financial advice. Crypto and Web3 can be risky. You can literally lose it all. In fact, if you invest on account of what we say, you probably will lose it all. So don't do that. In all honesty, the point of this podcast is to remove the noise of markets and price and focus on utility and implementation anyway. So you should not take any of this as financial advice. Thank you, friends, and see you in the next one.